Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Exploring Tools for Regulatory Compliance in the Shifting Sands of the Cannabis Industry. It is presented by Ezra Pryor, Applied Market Specialist at Heidolph, North America. He is also the founding member of the American Chemical Society Cannabis Chemistry Subdivision. My name is Judy O'Rourke, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We are delighted to bring you this educational web seminar presented by LabRoots. LabRoots is the leading scientific social networking website and producer of educational virtual events and webinars. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone this event is interactive. We encourage you to participate by submitting as many questions as you want during the presentation. Simply click on the Ask a Question box located on the far left of your screen and type your questions into the drop-down box. Our speaker will respond to your questions via email following the presentation. If you have trouble seeing or hearing the presentation, please click on the Ask a Question box to let us know that you're experiencing a problem. This presentation is educational and thus offers continuing education credits. Please click on the Continuing Education Credits tab located in the top right corner of the presentation window and follow the process to obtain your credits. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ezra Pryor. I will now turn the presentation over to him.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Judy. And as she mentioned, my name is Ezra Pryor. I'm an Applied Market Specialist with Heidolph, North America, and founding member of the American Chemical Society's Cannabis Chemistry Subdivision. And today, I'm going to talk to you about tools that you can use to support your own regulatory compliance in the cannabis industry. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview and let you know what we're going to be talking about today. Compliance is a challenge. Certainly it is a complex challenge, and it can be unclear what rules we need to follow and when those rules change and what we need to do if we're not following those rules to then become compliant, right? Non-compliance is both dangerous and costly. So we can see issues along the lines of accidents happening because you're not in compliance and those compliance rules are there to keep us safe. We can see fines, we can see loss of license, things like that. So it's certainly a significant issue. And the good thing is that you're not alone. There's a lot of resources that are available that can help us be successful in this space. So some of these solutions would include environmental health and safety officers or compliance officers. So these are going to be full-time staff within your facility that can help you address some of these challenges. A consultant, so somebody from a third party, an outside company that can give you advice on how to better follow those issues, follow those rules. Another would be nonprofit certifications. So there are institutions which are nonprofits and are willing to come to you with a set of standards and evaluate you for your ability to meet those standards. And then, provided you can live up to those standards, then you can be certified with that company. So that can be an asset for your doing business with customers or with other businesses. And lastly, we have software support solutions. And what's really interesting about these software support solutions is that they operate with all of the previous three solutions or on their own. So you can use that software tool to make your environmental health and safety officer more effective, to help that consultant be more effectively using their time, or to help that nonprofit certification better evaluate you for compliance. So one of the problems around compliance is that it's a moving target. So we're going to see changes in that legal landscape, right? When laws change, so does compliance. And so it's going to be a challenge to understand what you need to do to stay compliant. Sometimes we have medical, recreational, or hemp laws that are completely distinct from each other. And so what your facility is going to have an effect on what you need to do to be compliant. And you may have a facility that does multiple things, right? sometimes we have provisional regulations. So in California, for example, we had about a year of regulations that were in place for just that year while they were working on the larger regulations. So that's difficult because you need to be compliant with those provisional regulations, and then you need to be ready to be compliant with those permanent regulations. Revised regulations. So we see states where their regulations were certainly not ideal, and they realized that, and then they changed them. So you've got to be able to be aware of what those regulations are as they change, because you'll be responsible for them, at an ongoing basis. And then some places have multi-state facilities, which means having multiple sets of regulations in order to be compliant. And so that can be a real big challenge. Hopefully someday we'll have regulations that are the same across state lines, but it's not what we're doing. That's not where we're at right now. So just to give you a sense of, what is the state of compliance? How are people doing? And the state of Oregon had a particularly poor reputation for being in compliance. Number one, they didn't have a whole lot of oversight. The regulatory body was not prepared to really oversee all of these facilities. They just made the law such that people could get started, and they got started, but the degree to which they were following the rules was pretty limited. So 27% were found to have deficiencies, and 10% were at risk of closure. So those deficiencies were so significant that it actually merited closing down the facility. And it's important to realize that this is only 10% of those facilities that were open in Oregon. So safety issues. Compliance is not arbitrary. So oftentimes when we see regulatory compliance rules, they apply to things that can keep us from endangering environmental health, endangering our worker safety health, and endangering consumer health, right? So safety issues are something that we can avoid by being in compliance. So let's take a look at a few of these issues that we discovered on a laboratory audit. So this is where I like to play an audience participation game, but given the format of today, that's not really feasible. So we're just going to kind of go through them. So we've got 3 issues pictured here. And the first issue on the left is an obstructed exit. So we have boxes that have been placed in front of the door, and that's not a good place for storage, because if there's a fire, if there's an accident, and some people have to rush out of that facility, then they're going to be tripping over these boxes and then tripping over each other and potentially not making it out. So that's a huge issue to be aware of. The other issue in the middle is that there's an extension cord that's running on the floor and under the door. So number one, that extension cord should not be permanently installed. Extension cords are for temporary use. Number two, it's a tripping hazard because it's running across the doorway. And number three, that's gonna wear down over time because the door is rubbing against it constantly, right? And lastly, the one I always ask people to guess and nobody ever can, is that the fire extinguisher is hidden, right? The fire extinguisher is hiding behind those traffic signs on the bottom right. So that was a huge issue, because if there's a fire, if there's an accident where you need a fire extinguisher, you want to be able to find that. You don't want to have to be stumbling around looking for it. So those are 3 significant issues. This one here is a little less obvious. So this is a flammables cabinet. So this applies more to laboratories. So all of the brown bottles on top are solvents, right? So methanol, ethanol, acetone, things like that. And they're going to be extremely flammable. So that's why they're in this cabinet. A lot of times people use these flammable cabinets to store other chemicals, even though it's not appropriate. So it would be appropriate to store acids along with your flammables. However, when you include a base in with your acid, then you have a serious issue, because that reaction is going to be exothermic, which means that it's going to produce heat. And when you produce a lot of heat in the same container as a whole bunch of flammable solvents, you could have yourself a serious chemical fire. So, and if you're keeping score here, it's that little plastic bottle down in the bottom that the arrow is pointing to that is sodium hydroxide in pellet form. And that clear bottle to the right of it would be concentrated hydrochloric acid. So the two of those mixed together is going to make a really strong reaction. And this is a little bit of levity, but it's also an important issue. So it's critical that we don't just think about safety or talk about safety. It's important that we find a way to make an action plan so we can move forward and correct those issues and really avoid some safety risks, because if we can talk about it, and if we're not taking any action, it's not doing any good. And I think a lot of times that's a risk that we take, because it's such a challenging role just to be able to establish that, what is that safety issue? We spend all this time evaluating what are these safety issues that we neglect to actually act on those things and eliminate those issues. So I'd love to take a minute to talk about a laboratory in California that was inspected by the state OSHA. So this was a real tragedy. This laboratory had several issues, and I'm only going to highlight 3 of them. And you can see just what kind of fines we're talking about. So the first issue is that they had blocked exits and fire extinguishers. So not unlike the ones we saw in the first photograph. Now, this is going to cost that facility $156,772. Now, the second issue was the fire extinguishers were not maintained. And that means having your fire extinguishers inspected on a regular basis and making sure that their pressure is sufficient and changing them out if they're losing pressure. So that cost this facility $87,297. Now, the last one is about a hazardous communication plan, right? So what happens if there's a chemical spill? What do your employees do? What if somebody gets a chemical burn? These are things that need to be in writing. So it's not enough if everybody knows what to do. Everybody needs to know what to do, and it needs to be in writing. And this cost that company nearly $250,000. And unfortunately, this facility was not able to stay open because of the magnitude of their expenses, the magnitude of their fines. So this is a huge issue. And, if you've put a lot of time and money into getting a facility up and running, of course you want to keep it. So you have to protect your license. You have to protect your workers. Sometimes those are family members, right? So we want to make sure that, everybody's safe and that our investment is safe. So accidents can cost a lot as well. So the average workers' compensation settlement in 2015 was $21,800. And that's just the average. Certainly the potential is much higher. And as I mentioned, sometimes we hire people that we know are family members. And so of course we don't want them to get hurt as well. You could lose your product. So depending on the nature of the accident, you can lose huge quantities of what you are distributing. And that can mean huge losses. And if we are dealing with slim margins, then we really are not in a position to be throwing away product, right? You can have a halt in production or distribution. Sometimes an issue comes up that's so significant that we need to stop and we need to address that issue before we continue. And that means stopping what you're doing. And that could mean really losing a lot of money. Recalls are huge liability. If you find that you're distributing contaminated product, you can deal with an average direct cost of around $10 million. And the worst part of it is that you can lose the trust of your customers. You can lose your loyalty, your customer loyalty, because they feel betrayed. And that can go, that's the indirect cost, and that can be really significant. So we want to avoid that, certainly. And the last issue is that an accident can cause a regulator to come in. So you could be, lucky enough to never be inspected, but then you've got one accident and all of a sudden the fire marshal wants to come take a visit. And that can be a huge issue. So you can have a lot of compliance issues that no one ever knew about, and all of a sudden you've got a lab accident, and now they want to come look. And if you're not in compliance, you could be dealing with those fees, and you could potentially be losing your license. Yeah, so loss of license. 10% of the facilities in Oregon are at risk of losing their license. So it's not an insignificant issue. Many states are just rolling out regulatory oversight, and so it's been something we can get away with in the past, but it may not be moving forward. We could see more closures as oversight ramps up. So these departments are going to live on fees, and so they're going to try to do that. They're going to try to levy a lot of fees so that they can fund themselves. And your eligibility could be compromised. So you could have a license that you worked really hard to get, and if you get shut down, if you lose your license, it may not be just as simple to get it again. So, and the last thing that I want to call your attention to is that there's oftentimes law enforcement that wants to do something in particular. They want to shut us down because they feel like that's the right thing to do. And so they're looking for excuses to do that. This is another little bit of levity. These guys got together and cut down countless wild hemp plants, right? It's just wild hemp, right? But they thought that was the right thing to do. And so they spent huge amounts of energy. And even though there's nobody breaking the law, the plant can't be arrested for, dropping seeds and planting itself. So you want to give them no excuses to raid your facility, right? And tell me why they always seem to look like they just shot some big game, right? These plants did not defend themselves. So the good news, right? There are solutions for these issues. There are resources to help you succeed. So the first is going to be a compliance officer, as I mentioned previously, and that's going to be somebody that works at your facility full time. And that's going to be somebody whose sole responsibility is for establishing and maintaining compliance. The second solution is a consulting service. So there are a wide number of consultants in the cannabis industry that are willing to come in and help you to address those issues. I think you do need to be careful because not every consulting service can do everything. So there are also nonprofit certification programs that can come and present a set of standards to you and help you meet those standards so that you would be prepared for perhaps federal oversight as it comes. And lastly, there's the self-audit software. So what I really like about this self-audit software is that it's compatible with all three solutions, or it can stand alone. So we'll come back to all four of these solutions. So first off, your compliance officer. And so again, this is a full-time employee. They may lead a team. Oftentimes compliance officers are going to have direct supervision over a number of people so that they can address those issues in a timely manner, especially with large facilities. The average income for a compliance officer or environmental health and safety officer is going to be around $71,800 per year. They're going to help you establish compliance, and they're going to help you maintain compliance. I think it's a common misconception that the tricky part is establishing compliance, and then once you've done that, your job is done. But it really isn't, because again, we've got these shifting legal landscapes. We've got issues that crop up. And, there's always room for improvement. So maintaining compliance is going to be just as much of a job as establishing compliance was. And then lastly, they're going to interface with outside auditors, hopefully better than the little cartoon here, but they're going to be available for your facility to be audited, right? So if the fire marshal or the Cannabis Control Board comes in and wants to inspect your facility, then they've got a person that is prepared for that eventuality, and that person can help the auditor get through your facility and without issues, help provide all that necessary paperwork. So that's a really significant advantage. Nonprofit certificate programs. So there are a number of facilities that will, organizations that can help you establish a certification. So these are not necessarily going to be compliance. So you have to look at what are they certifying on, right? So there's the Cannabis Certification Council, there's A2LA, and then there's patient-focused certification. And in all cases, there's probably going to be more examples than I'm going to pull up, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to kind of pick a few and then drill down a little bit. So the Cannabis Certification Council is chiefly focused on organic and fairly produced cannabis. So they're a nonprofit, and they're interested in education and transparency for the cannabis industry. And they were formed out of the Ethical Cannabis Alliance in Portland and the Organic Cannabis Association in Denver. And so, if your goal is legal compliance, these guys are probably not going to be the ones to go with. But if your goal is to have an organic product, these guys are going to probably be able to help you out. The next solution I'll talk about is A2LA. And so they focus on independent and internationally recognized certifications. They are laboratory certification only. So they're not going to really be able to help you out with a grow or a dispensary, but they are going to help you get that laboratory up to snuff in a way that's internationally recognized. So, and they work on ISO certifications. And just to give you a little bit of information about, what kind of certifications can you actually get from A2LA. So this is the list. Yeah, so as you can see, these are all focused on laboratories and particularly testing laboratories. So, and our next solution is going to be Americans for Safe Access Patient-Focused Certification. And this one is really specific to the cannabis industry. And so they used the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia, FDA and EPA regulations in order to establish the standards that they'll present to you and help you meet. So they offer certifications for cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and laboratory. So this is really probably going to be your best solution in terms of getting certified specifically for cannabis facilities. So consulting companies. Again, there are a wide number of consulting companies, and I'm only going to touch on a few. Cannabis Advising Partners, Canna Advisor, American Cannabis Consulting, and RJLG or RJ Lee Group. So Cannabis Advising Partners. So this company focuses on licensing and growth and compliance as well. And they focus on California. So that's great if you live in California. If you don't live in California, then this is probably not the solution for you. They do have 20 years of California compliance experience. So that's definitely a positive. And they also claim to be managing 1,300 facilities. So that's certainly an advantage. And they're also focusing primarily on licensing. So their main competency is going to be in helping people get licenses. So maybe they're not the best for compliance, but you'd really have to investigate further. So next I'll talk about Canna Advisor. So these guys do business development, staffing, sourcing, brand development, licensing applications, startup, operations readiness, growth and optimization, exit strategy, and compliance. So they do a lot. And so I would be concerned with, to what degree are they proficient in compliance? If that's really your goal, is to be in compliance, how good are they at it? And again, that's something where you're going to want to interface with them directly, or interact with some of their previous customers to get a sense of that. So the next one I'm going to look at is American Cannabis Consulting. So again, we've got the laundry list of equipment fulfillment, design and build out, hemp services, cultivation cube, regulatory compliance, operations management, branding and marketing, and now they're in all 50 states and Canada. So that last statement really gives me pause, because last I checked, there were around 30 states that had some medical or recreational cannabis provisions in the law. So what are they doing in the other 20? I don't know. So maybe that's a good question to ask them. So the last consulting solution that I'll point you towards is the RJ Lee Group. So these guys are primarily, they operate in multiple industries. So they have a lot of experience in terms of addressing challenges across different industries. They offer legislative services in addition to consulting. In addition to compliance. They offer laboratory services in Pennsylvania and Washington. So they have the advantage of actually being a laboratory. So they're going to be able to do testing and such. Whether or not they could do testing on cannabis is another question, and something you should ask them. And again, they provide laboratory services and compliance support. And the interesting thing is they'll work with those nonprofit certification programs and help you come up to speed with those programs. So that, I think, is an interesting advantage if that's the way you want to go. So the last thing I want to talk to you about is AuditProHBX. So this is a software solution for compliance in the cannabis industry. And I have to admit that I'm biased here, because this is a solution that Heidolph North America offers. So AuditProHBX, you can learn more at auditpro.com. It's easy to use. It loads on any iPad or cell phone or laptop. And what it will do is provide you with a series of checklists that you can use to inspect your own facility. There's fast automatic report generation. So if you are a compliance officer, they're typically going to be working with a huge stack of binders and doing paper audits. And this could take months. And in the end, they still need to use that data that they've collected to generate reports. And what's really useful about this tool here is that the reports are automatically generated. So not only can we take what might have taken months and get it down to a week or even a couple of days, now you can take that that data and instantly transfer it into a report. And we'll take a look at that. And those reports can be really useful for getting your higher ups to understand the value of compliance and what's at risk, and allocating the proper resources. They can also be useful for motivating your team that are responsible for addressing these issues. And they're really good because you can customize them in order to better make your case. It's cloud-based data storage, so you don't have to worry about your device being broken and losing your data that way. That your data is all going to be stored in a remote server, so that you don't have to worry about whether that stuff is secure or not. It's customizable. We can put in any set of requirements. So you can take these, for example, these nonprofit certification programs, you can take their criteria and punch them into the system. And then that's going to be able to, help you become compliant that way. And these guys come from an environmental health and safety background. So the Audit Pro guys were working in environmental health and safety and waste remediation long before the software tool existed, and they saw that there was this need. And so they were able to address that. And this AuditPro software is not brand new. Instead, they've got nearly a decade of experience in utilizing this product in healthcare, manufacturing, education, and research. So let's take a moment and just kind of look at what we're actually talking about, right? So I can talk about it till I'm blue in the face, but let's take a look at it. So the software tool is going to give you a set of yes or no questions that are broken down into subsets. So first, which kind of a facility are we looking at? Are we looking at a cultivation, retail, dispensary? And then we're going to be able to look at specific issues like packaging and labeling, security, so on and so forth. And then once we get down to that, we're going to be able to actually get to these checklists, and these yes or no questions are going to be able to be addressed as you walk through your own facility and inspect that facility. And so you're going to be able to take a photograph, make a comment specific to your issue, which can be really useful, because if you're going to communicate that issue to somebody who's responsible for doing that job, it may not be clear what they need to do in order to be, taking care of that for you. So here's an example of a photo. There was supposed to be an alarm on the door. There's no alarm on that door, and you're able to just scribble onto it, no alarm. And the other thing is that when we're done, so that's the front end, right? Those are the checklists, and that's what it looks like when you are actually doing your survey. Now, after you've done your survey, you get a report automatically generated, and this is the most plain option for the report. These are line items, but what's really useful is you can look at specifically what was the issue, what is the corrective action required, what's the regulation that applies to this, were there any photos, what is it going to cost me, and these are all automatically generated. And I don't know if you guys have tried to read regulations like cover to cover, but it is awful. It's dry, it's never ending. And what's really useful here is you can take an issue that you've discovered in your laboratory without knowing the regulation. You've identified that issue, and then they'll give you a little blurb about what in that regulation applies to that issue. So as you're discovering issues in your laboratory or other facility, you can learn about those regulations piece by piece, which I think is really cool. So again, that's the corrective action and what was the issue. And then lastly, you can assign these to people on your team. So these people are going to get an email that looks, that outlines all this information, and you're going to be able to take that and push it forward to them. And you're going to be able to track that too. So on your own system, let's say you've got 5 people on your team, you can assign these to any of the 5 people, and then you're going to get notifications when they come back and tell you that it's done, right? So that can be a really good tool for increasing communication and making sure things don't fall off your radar, right? There's a lot of things to keep track of here. And so if we can keep them all on a spreadsheet and get automatic updates as to, when they're being done, then that's a whole lot of load off your back, right? And then lastly, you've got graphic reports. So these are going to talk about, how long were reports open, were issues open, which facilities have the most issues, what was the most expensive issue, which facility has the most expensive issues, what employee is handling their issues better than others, right? So that's a tremendous resource for not only informing yourself about what those issues are and where they are and who's taking care of them and how much they might cost you, but they're also a tremendous resource for making an argument to your boss or your employees about what's important and what we need to spend resources on, right? Because we all have limited resources. So not only do we help you execute these things in a short period of time, but we also can help you identify where your limited resources are most useful. So I think that's a really tremendous opportunity. And, you know, as I mentioned before, this works with all of those previous solutions. So you can have an environmental health and safety officer who can utilize this product to better do their job. You can have a consultant that uses this product to evaluate your facility before they even fly out, so they know what they're walking into, and you can save yourself like a plane ticket, right? Because usually you got to fly a consultant out. Also, you know, it can work with that third-party certification program, because you can input any criteria you'd like into that system. It's easy to use. Anybody can just pick it up and have the expertise of a seasoned auditor at their fingertips. It's customizable. You can change the way your reports look. You can change the way when you can change what's on the checklist. You can add stuff. It's really flexible tool. It's got fast and automatic report generation. It's cloud-based data storage, so it's all really secure. And lastly, it's going to improve your compliance and improve your safety and reduce risk automatically. And the way that it's going to do this is by helping you identify issues, identify solutions to those issues, and then track your progress through those issues being addressed. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, compliance is a huge issue. Compliance is hard, but you're not alone. You've got a whole lot of tools available to you that can help you address these issues. So the many sources of support come as environmental health and safety officer or compliance officer, nonprofit certification programs, consultants, and my personal favorite, software tools. So these are some of my references. I'm going to make this presentation available as a PDF. So if you'd like to download it, you're certainly welcome to. And then lastly, I'm just going to put my contact information up, because if there's anything I can do to help you, I'm happy to do it. So feel free to reach out, and looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ezra, for that informative presentation. I would also like to thank LabRoots for making today's educational webcast possible. Before we go, I want to let everyone know that this webcast will be available for on-demand viewing through June 28th of 2019. And as a final reminder, our speaker will follow up with any questions you've submitted via email. That's all for now. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.